This is your last chance. After this...
Or should we not follow the advice of the galactically stupid?
That is a nice boulder.
Ludicrous speed! Go!
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you pre-recorded from two undersized apartments in New York City, it's Revenge of the Film Nerds.
There, we're in a tight spot.
I hate when people talk during the movie.
With your hosts, Black Crystal.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
And Jack Manley.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
A podcast for nerds by nerds.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Failure is not an option.
And now, here are your hosts, Black Crystal and Jack Manley.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of Revenge of the Film Nerds. And I am so excited today to be with the lovely, the extraordinary, manly Jack Manley to get into one of the most awesome films I have seen in a really long time. Now, I know, Jack, this is your favorite, but we've got to let the people know every single one is your favorite. I'm convinced you've set it up. It's rigged. We won't watch a movie you don't like, and it's fine.
Not only that, but I've gotten us to go to my favorite year of film again, like 3 times in the first 6 episodes, 1979 again. BK, before I tell you this, I'm going to promise you and the viewers, we will not go to 1979 again this season, okay? I'm putting a ban on my favorite year of film.
Well, you're right to have it be your favorite year of film. There are some quality gems out there, so valid, absolutely valid.
Oh, yeah. We're not banning it for other seasons, mind you, just this one. But I'm so glad that before I put that ban in place, we're getting to watch 1979's All That Jazz. And BK, I'm excited about this, not just because of the fact that it's one of my favorite films. I'm excited about that because it is an impossible task to find this film these days. Would you believe, folks, that we had to watch this off of my personal DVD? Because when you go through the streaming services, not only is it not available for streaming, it's barely available to rent, BK.
No, you can't even rent it. You actually have to buy a copy off Amazon. That is the only way to get a hold of this film.
It boggles my mind because All That Jazz is considered to be one of the, if not the best film musicals of the 1970s. This was nominated alongside Apocalypse Now and Kramer vs. Kramer for Best Picture in 1979. Even Alien wasn't nominated that year, and yet this film has almost been lost in popular discourse. You can't find it on Prime, you can't find it on Netflix or Hulu or HBO Max or Disney Plus. None of these services even carry this film for renting. If I hadn't had it on DVD, we'd have been stuck this week.
Well, thank God, Jack, because honestly, watching this at the age that I am now, I really feel like it was something I needed to see. Being a creative, being someone who has been in that kind of performance art space, this film really did resonate with me a lot as an artist.
It resonates a lot with me as an artist as well. And I think we'll get into why once we discuss the plot, because it's so laced with a lot of discussion of the entertainment industry. But I just feel it's important to make that point of how difficult it is to see this film, because it really is that kind of rare gem that you get every once in a while of a film that is just very honest and very, I guess, poignant in its execution, despite being a very high concept type of deal. So, BK, we prefaced our own love for this film and our difficulty in finding it to see it, but we need to make sure these people understand what this musical is about. So I think we need to get into that BK synopsis.
Let's go BK synopsis time. Okay, so All That Jazz is about a gifted but deeply narcissistic director and choreographer, Joe Gideon. He smokes, he sleeps, and drinks his way through several different creative projects Despite the pleas of those around him to slow down and check on his mental health, he continues to delusionally invest all of himself in his work while flirting with death in this literally critically acclaimed musical of the entertainment industry. And it doubles as a cutting self-reflection of the director of this very film. Now, let me tell you guys, I don't even think that gives it justice. This movie is an experience about show business. To give you that one-liner, that is what this movie is about.
Man, that's impressive that you're able to actually do it twice, and you're able to sum it up better even when you do the even shorter version. That's impressive work.
Thank you.
When you call this a self-reflection on director Bob Fosse, yes, that Bob Fosse, the famous choreographer. When you talk about it being a self-reflection, this film draws so much from his actual life experiences that it is crazy. To the point where I kind of have to give you guys a breakdown on Fosse's first 20, 25 years in show business.
Oh, yeah. Mind you, before you get into it, Jack, like I had no idea about this background information on the director. So as I'm watching this film, and some of you are lucky to know this now because it will be a whole other experience. Like I have to go back and watch it. So I just had to preface that. Like this is pretty integral to part of the experience. I would say so myself.
Yeah, Fosse really got his start, obviously, as a dancer and choreographer, as he was a staple of Broadway in the mid-50s. He basically got his first jobs doing dancing and was so impressive at understanding the ins and outs of it that he got a choreography gig in the mid-50s working on The Pajama Game. It was the first time he ever choreographed anything. And right after that, he would go on to choreograph a Broadway version of Damn Yankees in 1955. And this was where he really made the most important creative connection of his career, is he met Gwen Verdon, the actress and dancer, on Damn Yankees, and would work with her as a creative partner throughout his early career.
I'm shocked because I'm already seeing the parallels. Like, that's what I'm geeking out. Like, I'm like, oh my God, that's his ex-wife. She was probably a dancer. That's why they had a thing.
It absolutely is that when he not only brought success to her career and helped her get several Tony Awards, which really was a very important currency back in the 50s and 60s for judging musicals, she in turn would get him his first Tony through his work on Redhead with her. And this would only just continue to propel Fosse to newer and newer heights. It was around this time that he choreographed his first film in The Pajama Game, the film version of the show that he had already choreographed on Broadway. And this really did give him his interest in working in film. And all this creative energy that he collected would peak essentially in 1973 when he basically gave us an achievement in award season that I don't think will ever be paralleled. BK, in 1973, he won a Best Directing Oscar, he won a Best Directing Emmy, and he won a Best Directing Tony.
No.
Nobody has ever done that before or since in directing. It is the best year a director has ever had if you're just using awards as a metric. Cabaret got him that Best Director Oscar. Pippin got him the Tony. And Liza with a Z, that special, got him the Emmy.
Oh, wow. I'm sitting here, I'm like, I didn't connect all of those. It makes sense, though. I see his style in it. Like, I'm like geeking out right now.
It's a truly impressive achievement, but it gives you that sense of why in the 70s, there were fewer bigger names in show business in general. You know, forget movies, forget Broadway. Show business as a totality, Fosse might have been the biggest name in the 70s. And that's why in the mid-70s, he became a real depiction of the character Joe Gideon we see in All That Jazz. In that time period, he was working on his second film, Lenny, which would turn into kind of an editing nightmare that he had to cut and recut. At that same time, he was also working on Chicago with Gwen Verdon. And all of this effort gave him a massive, massive coronary in the middle of the 70s and almost killed him with a heart attack.
Oh my God, this is crazy. Because like when you see the movie And like, that's the whole thing. When I saw the movie the first time, I was like, this was so much. I didn't know what was going on. I also was very young, you know, my mother being the born bred Broadway woman she is, and my whole family is very musically inclined. I was forced to watch these films at a very young age. And I was like, that was fun. Things happened. But going back and watching it now, and I'm listening to all these things, I'm like, it's a 1-to-1. The movie it is a documentary. It's the littest documentary I've ever seen in my life.
Well, it's very close to being autobiographical. If for those of you who are, true, film geeks like me, in that pretentious style, if you're looking at every style around the world, you want to find a lot of films to watch that are very high art. The closest parallel to this film is honestly Federico Fellini's Italian neorealist masterpiece, 8.5. Fellini's work on that film in 1963 is critically important to all that jazz and to all auteur work that came after it in general, because he did the most out of any director to introduce the concepts of magic realism into film. Now, BK, we know what magic realism looks like from films like Birdman. We know what it looks like from films like Pan's Labyrinth, where the real world is just sort of magnified through the lens of magical elements. And so Fellini's work really brought that into clear focus for semi-autobiographical or autobiographical work on cinema, because 8.5 is this very personal tale about a Playboy director and his experiences working on a particular film. All that jazz takes that template, Americanizes it with our sort of brand of show business, but it does a brilliant job of taking that energy from Italian neorealism and the French New Wave without making it come across as dated or slow for American audiences. It's our pace, and I think that's what succeeds about the film in such large form.
I was so astounded when you said that, because you shared that piece with us, that YouTube collection piece. I wanted to bring it up here because it really gave awesome insight to what you're talking about, and seeing that there is a lane for this, finding the words to be like, oh, I do know what that is. Like, this is a lane, this is a subject type, this is something people intentionally try to do, or something that they've created. You kind of get to see where the story came to be. And Bob Fosse, he talks about how he wanted to tell the story about death, but it was kind of, too dark. And the only way we know he knows how to talk about anything is through these successful music-based performances in so many different lanes. So to kind of see all that jazz is a combined creative baby of everything he's ever aspired to be, that's what it seems like to me. So autobiographical, I would say 100%. This is literally I feel his mind on the screen, and I get so many vibes from so many different works at the time. And one thing that really stands out to me there is just the biggest I would say Broadway to film musical I could think of that came out before this in my lane would be Jesus Christ Superstar, which is crazy, but the glam, the tone, the storytelling is there and incorporated, and this film really just takes off from the beginning, literally from the start, as an ode to other works. You were telling me, Jack, that entry audition, that cattle call scene at the beginning really is what I feel sets this tone for this autobiography.
And BK, the crazy thing is it starts immediately from the first moment we see Joe Gideon on the screen, played masterfully by Roy Scheider. The first scene is literally him getting started on his day, pumping himself up through a just amazingly hedonistic routine. Is while he's pumping Vivaldi and pacing in the shower, he's got a cigarette lit, he's taking amphetamines, he's already, before we get to Broadway, when we have his first conversations in his head with Angelique, played by Jessica Lange. This all happens in the first 60 seconds, but we know who he is that quickly. He is somebody who is overworked and overtired and is burning the candle at both ends because it has to always be showtime. You see him putting on a face the same way actors and the same way dancers do, which is why when we get to the on-Broadway sequence, maybe the film's most famous sequence up at the beginning, we already know what type of mindset we are supposed to be in about show business. We are supposed to be kind of cynical. We're supposed to see the way it wears him down before he even gets on the job.
You're right. And I totally feel like all of those opening scenes with Lady Death and those hype montages are like a quick little prequel, like, because it happens very quickly, and you kind of get wrapped into this I don't know, this fantasy. You know, it's clear that the scenes with the lady in white are something separate from what you see in the shower. It's clear that that is a set piece. It's clear that that is something we're probably going to revisit, like right off at the beginning. But then the show starts at that scene, and that's why I say at the beginning, I was like, that cattle call, that audition scene for me is like, all right, put the key in, let's go. Because as someone who's come from musical background and musical theater, that is everything. That is what you aspire to even be there at that call, let alone everything that our main character Gideon accomplishes and achieves throughout the whole story is just a little person. And you see Gideon even being pretty gentle with the people. The harshness of the auditions wasn't necessarily there. You saw him working with people, giving people chances, having to make decisions, having to say no, having to convey his vision to other people who ultimately make decisions. You can already just see so much conflict in this main character. And that's what got me. I'm all for my world building and character development. So off top, they were like, you go want to like this guy, but you also gonna maybe not like him. I think that's so awesome to accomplish something like that. That's very difficult.
You know what it is I think you hit something there. I guess the best way I can put it into words is that you feel charmed by Joe Gideon in this scene.
That is so, yes. He puts the magic on. You're like, you know what? I believe the mask. I don't need to know who's behind him.
And it does a brilliant job of hitting at something that we all understand as entertainers, particularly as talent. While Joe Gideon is being very nice and very deferential to these dancers, telling them, very calmly if they're good and if he wants them or not, it hits at the way in which people really do become disposable in entertainment when you are just the rank and file. You want that job, you need that job as an aspiring creative, but it's not guaranteed to you because there is, by necessity of the way that these productions have gotten bigger and bigger over our time, and in the 70s it was the same case, there's a necessity that people be disposable and be disposable to the needs of the investors and of the benefit of the show. You have to keep things going. The show must go on. And Gideon being calm there, it's a nice moment because he's keeping innocent people essentially calm in those difficult moments when they really need something. But it is also a recognition of how disposable they can be. There's even that moment when the dancers are leaving and one says to the other, "Fuck him, he never picks me. Sweetie, I did fuck him and he never picks me." You see the seedy underbelly of it, even as this dance sequence is going on, and you're seeing Gideon, the charmer, going to work in front of his producers, in front of his ex-wife and daughter. You see him putting on his act. But you also you start seeing the underbelly of this man, particularly his womanizing.
He is definitely a womanizer, Jack. Absolutely. And I feel what this film does so well is show that the difference between the stereotype of what show business is and Broadway is being something very frilly, is something that's, feminine centered, is something that's, considered gay. People say that about Broadway all the time. And here we're following the story of Joe Gideon, who is very much heterosexual, very much someone who is a straight male in this space and is getting all the ladies. And that is a reality. It is an industry filled with lots of women. It's very promiscuous, right? Women in tight clothes, dancing, you're getting hot and heavy. Some of the moves they're doing, it's just oh, baby, so to see him just finesse and kind of just manipulate the whole situation into what is good for him and his vision. You start to see his vision, I feel, after that, as we get into the major scenes. I only remember the major scenes because so much happens. I just attribute them as qualities of his character, all these in between sets, because we go back to him like pumping himself up all the time. Like, this guy is like broken, okay? And it makes me sad when I watch him in any scene. So look at me going off on a tangent.
No. It's a good tangent to go off of because broken is a very good word for his conduct in a lot of ways, particularly with the womanizing. Is in the early scenes, he's flirting with everybody early in this film. He's flirting with Victoria, this dancer at the casting call that he desperately wants to get in bed. He's flirting with death inside of his head in these scenes of magic realism. He's even a little bit flirtatious with his ex-wife in apologizing to her for messing up his schedule with his daughter. And of course, he is very flirtatious and open with his current girlfriend, but you see that he really doesn't consider fidelity to be a virtue. It's a deeply unlikable thing about him early, is it's not just that he is lacking in fidelity and is lacking in honesty, it's that the people in his life know he lacks that fidelity and still choose to be with him anyway. His girlfriend, Katie, who is played masterfully in this by Anne Reinking, who was at the time Bob Fosse's actually girlfriend and is essentially playing herself in this film.
Oh, wow.
When she confronts him about the cheating, it's a conversation that is more about her need for him than her trying to assert any independence in the dynamic. It's one of the great things about this film and about Fosse's self-portrait is, while it is hedonistic of himself to talk this much about who he is and put this much of himself into a project, it's not self-congratulatory. It is cutting. It is something about himself as a person he doesn't like. He sees his infidelity as a weakness, and he puts that weakness on screen. It's an indication early from Fosse that you're not going to like this character because I don't necessarily think you're going to like me all the time. And I think that's a brilliant choice to be that self-effacing that quickly in the first 30 minutes.
No, I think that's what gets me. Like, really, like, honestly, I've never been so character driven in a drama. I guess that's what we're calling this, right? Before, really. I mean, to not like him, but also still be fascinated with the way he operates, because you are right. The people around him kind of let it happen. You know, in the confrontation scene about the cheating with his girlfriend, she's trying to be like, oh, I'll just, go over and have a date with somebody else. And then it's almost like it's a joke, and it's like, haha, like I can't follow through with it. And this probably happens every 2 weeks. You really get that feeling of like, this is normal. Let alone getting the feeling of like, wow, this is the director. Like, now knowing these things, I'm like, wow, this is the director and his girlfriend is playing his girlfriend in the movie. Like, how now that scene double hits, because I'm like, I saw her and I was like resonating a little bit, and now I'm like going back watching and I'm like heated for her. I'm like, yo, honey, like, you kill him in that scene. Like, how are you doing this right now? So Jack, I'm so glad you told me about that.
It's a very interesting dynamic. I use the word hedonistic. It really is kind of an amazing act of arrogance to cast your literal girlfriend as your figurative girlfriend on the screen. I kind of love it because of that. I kind of think it. I think it really adds to the way the movie is constructed. Again, it's just one of those little things when you learn about the film that really makes it magnify for you. But I have to say, it's not the only thing that we see of Gideon's personality in these first 30 minutes, which I think is a good way of kind of piecing this film up into quarters like that, because it is kind of a 4-act film. I think that the other real aspect to talk about in these first 30 minutes is you start seeing his obsession with death. And again, it shows up in those quick edits right at the beginning of the film with the Vivaldi scene, is you see this brief insert of him walking on a tightrope. You see him working like crazy to edit a comedy film that is discussing the 5 stages of death. And you see the way that he's running himself ragged, that he doesn't look like a very healthy person from the word go in this film. But he's fascinated with death in a lot of ways. And I think from the beginning of this, when you see him putting on that face, he's almost more fascinated with death and more living for death than he is for life. Is he seems like he's kind of a dead person in this film.
You know, honestly, you're right. It's almost as if it's like it's in that shadow realm of death through the whole film, and you're just seeing like a projected version of what Gideon views his own life as. Like looking back on it and thinking about all those cuts in between, I'm like, man, maybe he was dead the whole time. Like there was no process. Like even though it felt like a process, maybe he was just sitting there talking to himself. And that's how like deep this movie gets. Like that's what gets me hype about it. I'm like, look at me over here, just like waxing philosophical, like talking about what does it mean to be alive. And I really think that is one of the biggest things, like literally the dichotomy between life and death. And like it's really seen throughout it, whether it's technical, and I'll get off on it later, but like there's lots of reflections, there's lots of like symbolism and visual cues too that kind of show off what that means. And I'm trying to think of my scene, like my favorite scene that really like showcases that the most, and I'm not sure, Jack.
Well, there's a lot to choose from, because something that strikes me as we discuss this is a lot of his relationship with Angelique, the angel of death, in these set pieces within his own head. It's almost as though in his infidelity, he thinks he can be unfaithful to death as well. He can sort of see life by having these sweet moments with his girlfriend or with his daughter, but he doesn't have to stay faithful to life or death. And as the movie continues, you see that as his real mistake, is he thinks that he can involve himself and flirt with death like this without incurring a real cost. But you start to see things wear on him by the time we actually get into the meat and bones of his creative process as they start working on this musical, which is unnamed in the movie. It's really geared as a vanity project for Audrey, his ex-wife in the film, played by Leland Palmer, to give her the opportunity to play a much younger woman. It's almost as though his infidelity is carrying over into consequences here, as he's repaying somebody he has been unfaithful to. And it is leading to a great creative drain, BK, because in the scenes when he's constructing this musical, he doesn't seem to feel like he's got much of a creative spark.
Yeah, he's really emotionally struggling with figuring out what works. Now, I guess this is combining a bunch of scenes, but in this next movement of the film, it's very much different scenes of Gideon going into his various jobs, because he doesn't have one job. He actually has two very distinct jobs, whether he's being a director for an actual film or being a director choreographer for a stage play. He's doing those at the same time and seems to be not finding it. Like as a creative or an artist, you know what that means, okay? This isn't it, okay? It doesn't hit. And you see that in Gideon, like trying different ways and trying to deal with the things that are thrown at him, seeing him having a vision but not being able to execute it, whether it's cutting the film, The Comedian, is that what it's called, Jack?
That's correct, BK. And it is, again, in a direct parallel to Fosse's life, very much based off of his process in editing Lenny, which was an extremely controversial film and had its own nightmares in the editing process, the same as this film on the screen did and all that jazz.
Oh my gosh, like, and this scene, low-key one of my favorites too, because like I've done editing myself as the visionary, so, and I know you edit the podcast as well, Jack, so like, you know, when you're staring at the waves or you're staring at the screen and you're like, oh, that's not it, or I just missed it, or something's off here, or it's not making sense to me. I felt that frustration, and I feel like I didn't like him, but until I saw him struggling on the actual edits of The Comedian inside the film, that's what started to get me to kind of like Gideon as a creative. I was like, no, this guy has a vision. I don't think he's just being a dick. He might have been just being a dick for the stage play because his wife's involved and he's being picky. Like, that's typical. But for this, I don't know, something just connected with me.
It's probably the most earnest side of Gideon that we've been exposed to, because underneath this philandering, boozing, drug addict who doesn't ever seem to sleep is this genuinely driven creative person. At the end of the day, he does care about what he's expressing. It's just finding the ways to unlock that. And it happens through conversations with his daughter and his ex-wife from, weirdly enough, different perspectives on fidelity, which ends up being a central theme to this as much as death does. In discussing this number and trying to brainstorm for it, he has a lovely scene with his daughter where she is berating him about getting married, about settling down, about stopping screwing around and trying to get him to be faithful to something. And he gives a lot of pushback in that and has his first real coughing fit and real bout of sickness after she leaves that scene. You see her try to inject life into him and ultimately fail. And it's a moment where Gideon is still unable to figure out what he's going to do. But at the same time, I think that fidelity will play into this later as pertains to his ex-wife. But I'm curious how you felt about that exchange with his daughter, because it's a sweet scene that breathes a little life into Gideon, but it ultimately is futile on her part.
Yeah, it's a great scene because compared to the first time we see him interact with his daughter's very again, you're thinking she's going to be a very typical annoying daughter that is with the other parent. And you really find out the daughter's actually far more involved and far more invested than you would initially think. So to have that scene there, to have her be so candid with him, to be so witty, just like him, you see, oh, that's definitely his kid, and oh, he is definitely in love with his daughter. Even if he can't make it, he cares about her. But the idea of the fidelity or of I don't know, trusting someone to settle down, I think it was very interesting that it didn't hit. I didn't actually think about that at the start, but thinking about it now, it has me maybe that is all he needed, was something to ground him, and he wouldn't even let his daughter be a part of that grounding, still not even committing to doing things that have been promised. What was it, training or practice or something he was supposed to go to, he couldn't make it. Things like that, he couldn't do. So maybe it was just a sign of commitment.
I think that that's a very good way to look at it, because I think his perspective on commitment here really does factor into how he figures out how to stage the musical number. Because in his conversations on the musical with his ex-wife Audrey, in one of my favorite scenes where she is practicing with the composer while he's on the piano, he is sort of having a nervous wreck about the show, wondering if his number is going to get cut, because this takeoff with a song just isn't hitting for Gideon. And Gideon is having a breakdown with Audrey talking about this that becomes a marital between two people who are divorced. It becomes a discussion about just how unfaithful Gideon is and just how much that is a part of his character. And I think that kind of clicks something for him as we get deeper into the musical and we get into the final number. He kind of realizes in staging that his infidelity is something that helps him tap into his idiom as an artist, his way of discussing sex and living and life with a certain amount of disposability is what allows him to inject power into the musical, even if the composer and the producers are horrified by what he creates. But boy, oh boy, BK, does he create an incredible music number with Take Off With Us.
Oh my gosh, that number, I yo, the 70s, guys, let me tell you. Okay? I did quite a bit of interpretive musicals before, where it was very much similar, where you have Like, again, I know this was still rehearsal processes, but it was an ode to kind of classic interpretive and improvisational art. And the way he approached it was like, okay, we'll make it a little Showtimey, but I'm going to throw in this improvisational art at the end. Like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you this weird interpretation of what this means. You guys in Broadway want to kind of play the edge of being sexy and kind of want to show that sex sells, but you don't ever want to like commit to it. You don't ever want to double down to it. And I think that's exactly what he did. It's like the act goes, it's very nice, and the producers like it at the start, right? And then it hits that second wave in that scene, and it's like extra sexy. People are like gyrating. Like, it is wild, Jack.
What happens here is, at first, it's a staged number that's very kind of campy, sort of, flirting around the lines of sexuality with the lines, take off with us, we're warming up, so take off with us, choose any seat, all of these little double entendres that make it a fun kind of experience. And then the lights go out and it devolves into a very kind of raunchy but extremely expressive, very sexual interpretive dance. It shows, gay couples, both men and women, getting together. It shows sex more along the lines of disposable partners than it does any sort of faith. And the music gets more fierce and frenzied as it goes by. And the longer this set piece goes, the more horrified his producers and composer get by the actions. And what's amazing, BK, this is, again, believe it or not, as raunchy as this scene is, it is based off of something from Bob Fosse's real life.
Really?
When he was doing Chicago, I do not know exactly which number it was, but he was struggling with choreography and the way to stage the number. So he presented, when he was doing Chicago, and the book for that, he presented to his backers a scene very similar to this one, only it was apparently more sexual than the adaptation, all that jazz, and even less motivated creatively. It's astonishing that he got away with this.
It's crazy because, like, the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, that's Chicago. It's the spread eagle. I know it. It's the dance with the chick. And I'm like, God damn it. So now I've, like, tied them all up together. I'm like, oh, my God. Like, I see him. I see his expression. And it's so awesome to see it because there was something he was saying about that. I feel like having that scene in it. It was something he was saying about it. A lot of people in the industry say they want to talk about sex and sex sells again. And like in that line, right? Like you said, those lyrics were very like double entendres, but no one ever wants to see the rawness, the actuality of sex. I mean, so that scene there, of course, it made everybody uncomfortable. But the people who were involved, or the actors, it was for the first time, I think they felt good about it. Of course, as a performer, you want to feel good about it. But there was something about the ending of it. Gideon was happy. The performers were happy. The money people weren't so happy. And I feel like that was the moment where I was like, oh, are those going to be the villains? What is the antagonist? Like, it was the first time I thought he didn't have, an ear in with the producers and the decision makers.
Well, that's a really interesting point because I've always wondered about that in some with this film because I first saw this when I was 17. I was at a filmmaking program through NYU in Dublin for high schoolers. One of the best experiences of my life. And our teacher there, Robert Pietri, is the one who got me exposed to this film. And since then, I've watched it 5 or 6 different times. And every time I am baffled by that question of who is the real villain here. Because these producers are very sweet, very personable people, kind of the way you envision producers being in your head. But there is also that ruthless side to them of wanting to, in modern terminology, hit the quadrants, getting those market segments to watch it. Like, one of the laments as they're watching these dancers strip down and become blatantly sexual is, I think we just lost the family audience. They're focused on the money side of things. They're focused on show business. And as we get into it, I think we'll start to see, as we do in the second hour of the film, show business is really the antagonist here. It's not these people they are almost as much victims of their position and victims of their circumstance as they are directly antagonistic towards the creative expression of Joe Gideon.
No, I'm glad you said that because you are right. And I feel like we all know the producers and the money shakers are probably the root of the show business. So it makes sense that they start to be a little bit more villainized. But you are right, it's more abstract than that. It isn't just them. They aren't the only thing that gets to him. It's Gideon's whole lifestyle. It's honestly his very existence. And I think that I know I say that so like abstractly, like I'm getting to this point where it's like, what do you mean by that? But like I feel like he exists only to die. Like no matter what he does, like all of his actions are not aimed for growth. They're all silent cries of self-harm. Like I don't know, I connected with Gideon on like a very like mental health level. Like I see him. I see his struggle for creative expression. I see his anxieties and like I see what he's doing as a creative and trying to put himself into his work. And the only thing he can commit to, let's be real, Jack, is his work. He overcommits to his work, which is really weird.
It is weird, but this is kind of the brilliance of getting back to a little bit of film history. But this is kind of the brilliance that Italian neorealist and French New Wave cinema brought to the screen. While film had always been, from its inception up to the 50s and early 60s, a very spectacle-driven art form. You know, big budget pictures, big names on the screen, stars, Hollywood, all of that. New Wave and neorealist cinema said, let's cool the brakes on that. Let's just focus on very deeply personal stories. Let's build up personal drama. And that whole idea is what motivated almost all of New Hollywood, all the way from Bonnie and Clyde in 1967 to Heaven's Gate in 1980. It's one of the reasons that's such an important era for film in America, is that it's when film truly became personal rather than a series of spectacles. And that's a big shift here, especially for a film like All That Jazz, which is so driven by its protagonist that you have to be in his little world. You have to be inside of his struggle to get him.
You know, Jack, I'm very just emotional when it comes to Gideon, and like the way this movie just kind of focuses in on him, uses his lens, and like really just connects with you. Like, again, this is not the type of film I'm usually into, but Gideon as a character is just so fascinating. As a creative, I can't help but be very intrigued to like get to know him more. So like those lady in white scenes there like really pique my interest. The whole very interpretive expression of this director. Like now I can't get over this director. Like I feel like I know the director. Like the movie is him. Like I didn't even need to look it up. Just watch this movie and you'll know. Like, so that's what gets me so hooked on it. It's like, okay, cool. Like y'all wanted us to be very invested in this guy, and not just him, but his life. Like what it means for show business, what it means for his family. Like it was very much thought out that way. And in every scene, you really do see that.
I'm just going to allow myself right now to take a quick little victory lap, because I know that these small auteur-driven films are not what people usually are seeking out to watch. I've always loved these films, but I understand that I have always watched them because of the fact that I'm so inundated by film. I love that art house style so much that I actually look for it. So to hear somebody who doesn't seek out those type of films be fascinated by this, I'm taking that as a win.
Oh, you should, Jack, because like no. And I had been shown this. I was like, okay, maybe not. Maybe I'll just watch it for fun. Like, no, I got into it. Like, that was what's so cool. I was like, this is actually far more interesting than you think it is. Like, when you start to really experience it, you realize there's a lot of levels to what's going on. And then getting again, I can't stress it, getting the behind the scenes, you're like, God damn, like, is this not expertly crafted art? Like, I don't know what else this is.
Well, it is, and it does make me emotional too because of how much he was willing to put onto the screen about his real experience and about how fallible he is as a human. You even see it really pronounced here right after the erotica scene when his comedy movie finally has its premiere, and it's sort of joked about by his girlfriend and his daughter as being a bit of a flop when they do their little private number for him in his apartment of Everything Old is New Again. Just doing a quick little quirky dance because they love him and they want him to be cheerful. You get emotional because you realize in this scene, it's what I alluded to earlier with his daughter. His girlfriend and his daughter are the only people, along with his ex-wife, pushing him towards being alive and really trying to embrace the living realm. Everything around him, aside from that, is very performative. It's very showbiz. It's you can't let people see you crack. You have to kind of just work at burning that candle at both ends and being a little bit dead inside in order to strive and succeed in the business. While you realize that he does have a grounding. He has these chances for life. He's just uninterested in really seriously pursuing them. He has no desire to be faithful to that push towards life. And it's finally starting to get to him when they do the script read.
Oh yeah. It's good that you pointed that out because I'm on this whole commitment thing. He can't commit to life, man. He's good. Death, beautiful lady in white, death is at his door. And you expect him to commit to life?
And not only is she always there and is he always flirting with her, she, as Death, is very accepting and understanding of his foibles. She is charmed by his first sexual experience being deeply embarrassing and abusive. She is rather charmed by the words of his deceased mother talking in his head. Death is an accepting and understanding sounding board for Gideon. So you see that while he is trying to be unfaithful, she's quite a good seducer.
I'm geeking out at all of the symbolism because I'm like, yo, this is it. The relationship, that is making me freak out right now, Jack. Because totally, he is totally literally flirting with death. That is what that is. I can't believe when we first watched, I didn't think about that. Thinking about it now, I'm like, wow, absolutely. And she's so enticing and arguably more stunning and refined and delicate. You see a lot of features in the lady in white. I can't remember her name for the life of me. Please don't kill me, Jack.
Jessica Lange. Angela Leak is the character in the film, technically, the Angel of Death, but it is Jessica Lange, and I believe it might have even been her first role on film.
Wow, because she's so hypnotic. That's what I want to say. You really feel Gideon is being kind of pulled towards that realm, that magical realm we kind of talked about at the beginning. And the script read, like you said, is I think the deciding factor there is when it's okay, well, how do we see Gideon really confront death and failure and disappointment, which is interesting because the script read was positive.
It was positive, but it's a fascinating little scene because you and I kind of disagreed on what the central meaning of it was. It's a brilliant little scene of they're going over the script, and as they start into the script read, the sound just filters out of the scene entirely except for everything within Joe Gideon's body. You hear him wrap his fingers against the table. When he gets up to go to the window, you feel his hand, you hear his hand grip the bar there. When he has the pencil behind his back, you hear the pencil snap as something is literally snapping inside of him through this quiet. Now, having seen this film before, I understood that this was his first attack of acute angina. This was his first heart attack. But you took it to be something very different without that context.
Yeah, I saw that scene of him having crazy creative anxiety. Again, kind of going back to this, he's failing. He's failing at living. He's failing at his work. and is finally getting to hopefully a place that needs to be good. It's no longer is it good? It has to be good. Gets this script out and it's like everybody's loving it. You see people laughing, but you're not hearing them, right? Everyone is like, "Oh, this is great. This is quality." And like
in stitches, in literal stitches.
yeah, yes. And he's like emotionally detached from the situation in a moment in which as a creative when you're putting your work out there, right? Like and people are loving it, you would expect somebody to kind of relish in it, but you kind of see how much of a perfectionist he is and how critical of himself is. I feel in this scene he was having just anxiety of his work, of like putting it out there and like in his head, like, you know, it's not good enough, like I don't care about the laughter, like the sounds I'm focusing are on this because I'm not even here in the space with you. I've read it 1,000 times and I still don't think it's good. Even if you think it's good, it's not good enough. And I don't know, I started to feel really emotionally attached and sad for Gideon, because like as a creative, that's the moment you put it all on the line, right? And in the course of the production they were in, like we've got to like it, we've got to go, this needs to be a hit, it's all on this, like and it seems like he's doing all the work himself, like he doesn't have a writer. Like this is someone who is taking on multiple aspects of creating this stage production. So when that moment hits, I was like, oh, he's having anxiety, like he does not care about what's happening. And then boom, you're like, oh, it's a heart attack, like this guy's like going to the hospital. I was like, oh shit, he had anxiety to the point where he had a heart attack, because that's what I saw in my life. Like his fears manifested physically, like his mental anguish that he's been going with finally started to take physical form.
And I think that's a really intelligent reading of it. It's not something I had considered in watching it. I had sort of just seen it as something breaks because he is just burning that candle at both ends far too hard. But it really is something to be considered in this film, as we'll see in later scenes in this kind of third act here, is that he really is driven to sickness by the creative process and by creative feedback. Is that fear of criticism is what originally drives him into the hospital. Underneath it all is he's been very insulated from criticism by his network and by the people around him. Even if he's had to face some hard realities, you know, he's still creating. Here, he feels like it seems his creativity is inhibited a little bit, and it does literally send him to the hospital where, sad to say, but this is where the death metaphors really start to take over from fidelity, and we start getting back into the discussion of the comedy routine, the 5 stages of death: anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And right when he gets to the hospital, you start to see the anger at this guy, Dr. Ballinger, who's telling him that he's going to die if he keeps doing what he's doing. You know, he is in denial about wanting to take a rest. He thinks that 2 weeks in bed are ridiculous when he is working on a musical, even though both his ex-wife and girlfriend who are there are telling him, you know, did you not hear what the doctor just said? This could kill you. And you see him have another acute attack there, and his anger literally forces him to be bedridden and puts the musical on the shelf.
Yeah, and I think that's a really big moment, because it's like, as any other person, you'd be like, okay, this guy's just really lost in the sauce. Like, he's very motivated. His work is his life. Like, 2 weeks is an eternity to somebody who lives and breathes their work. Rest is a state of nothing, right? A state of, honestly, death at that point. Like, if I can't be doing my work, I might as well die. And I feel like Gideon really just holds true to that to the very end. And the musical getting shelved, it was like, okay, well, what do I do now? Right? Like, I can't just get better. Me being here doesn't just get me better. And then you start seeing like all of that stuff where people are coming over, like literally acting as if he's not even sick.
You know, it's a really interesting beat of the film because it quickly moves to that denial stage. But the one last thing I'd like to discuss with the anger too is the fact that when the show is canceled and it's all of the principals in the show, the actors, the dancers, the producers, the choreographer, all gathering to discuss Joe's health and the shelving of the show, it's an uncomfortable, weird kind of scene. Is they're trying to make it sound happy, you know, oh, we're going to keep the production together. Of course, we want to make sure that you're all taken care of. Not too much money, but we want to make sure you're taken care of. And then his ex-wife lying, as Joe Gideon, you literally see him lying in bed on a ventilator, and his wife is telling the cast, oh, he was up and talking and in great spirits, he has a new idea for a number. And you see the people trying to cheer each other up, despite the fact that there are a lot of uncomfortable, awkward-looking people in there. They understand that this is a bad situation for everybody. People have lost out because of this. The business is swallowing a bit of themselves. And so, of course, when Joe Gideon does improve and he gets access to that private room, of course, not only is he going to be in denial about his condition, but so are the others around him who are desperate to have that sense of normalcy. You see the people who are partying with him are the dancers, are the comedian from this film, and even the people who love him. The only people in his hospital room who seem even remotely interested in curbing Gideon literally smoking in the bathroom, like trying to feel up nurses, being this same swarthy, boozy character he's always been, are his producers. And even by the end of this denial act, you see the dancers and the people he's been partying with start to get uncomfortable. And BK, I feel like in that denial scene, you start to understand that Gideon's real work isn't his creative work. It's putting on a performance for others of the idea that he's living.
Oh, totally. That's a great way to put it, Jack. Because, he's literally, in the hospital room. That's what got me. I was like, you're in the hospital room doing the things that people said you were doing when you were on a ventilator. How in denial are you? You get moved there because you need to be there for a while. It's not just because you're better. That's not what that means, So to see those scenes, to see Gideon still be himself was really interesting for me emotionally, because these scenes really show how true Gideon is to his character. He literally, he's in his deathbed, ventilator and all, trying to be I'm out here and popping. Let me have some drinks. Come over, let's party in my private room. The nurse is hot. Bro, if you even cared about your work, wouldn't you focus on getting better, right? Wouldn't you, start to try to take it seriously? And that's, again, when I realized that's not his character. It's not even his work. Even as dedicated as he is and his work is his life, it's like you said, it's something else, something more than that.
Well, he even says in these scenes when he's talking with Katie, he says, I love show business, but he also says that he hates it. He says he can go either way. And I think in part, he is to himself in the world of show business, in this sort of perversely glitzy world that he is a part of. He does see this as taking care of himself, is by putting out that performative image of being okay. He thinks he's going to be able to save the musical. He thinks he is going to be able to create this impression that everything is going to be okay, and he's still in the game. He's pressing for that because he doesn't want to be out of the show. The denial is so strong because he wants to be involved with this again, and it ends up totally destroying his health.
It's sad because there's definitely multiple points in this whole end sequence where he could have just been on the right path, could have gone, but just things don't click with him. And it's so heart-wrenching to see, because you're you see how much of it is an act. You see how much it is a facade. And he really does just try to keep going, keep rolling with the punches, and being in heavy denial of what is the reality of the situation. And a little sidebar on the visual cues for this, because I feel at this, we're getting to a lot of these points where I didn't mention enough, but reflections in this, there's a lot of times where mirrors are used, a lot of times where you see the reflection of yourself, the reflection of other characters throughout the film. And I feel it just further presses the point of having that mask, having that inside look, you're supposed to be seeing the other side of yourself. And Gideon even at some points talks to the camera and does little oaths. He's quirky. He still has all these quips in his hospital bed. And it's bro, when are you gonna learn? When are you gonna learn, Jack? I don't know what was that moment, because I don't know if it ever happened.
I don't know if it sort of does, but your point on reflection is very salient, because there's a poignant message there in the fact that he's looking in the mirror so often, it starts again at the very beginning with the Vivaldi pump-up scenes. It is something you see when he is in his magic realist world talking to death. He's looking at himself in the mirror, but he's not really seeing his true self until you see later reflections in the film where, ironically, his image is very distorted when you see it on camera. The longer you go in the film, the reflections become more and more distorted, right up to the point where he starts going into surgery and having the hospital hallucinations. But before we get to those hallucinations, though, BK, again, you see entertainment crop up as a villain, is while you're seeing literal scenes on screen, for those of you who are squeamish, you're seeing literal scenes of a heart surgery juxtaposed by the producers talking with the insurer of the show and their accountant, the raw figures and numbers of the show and what it means if Gideon dies for their insurance coverage. And while he's having heart surgery, you're being told that if he dies and the show doesn't resume in 6 months, this could become the first show to make a profit without ever opening. And it's pitched gleefully as if Gideon's life is just irrelevant in this equation. And you see show business rearing its ugly head, as the villain. And at the same time, you see a little bit of personal death in Gideon because he finds out Katie has brought his infidelity full circle and has been unfaithful to him. And it kind of sets off his surgery and his hallucinations.
Yeah, I really think that him even doing the surgery in the first place is his first sign of bargaining, right? Oh, okay, it might actually be bad. Let me actually get this surgery, right? Like, and then having those scenes with the producers, it's like connecting that symbolism of like monetary value and like his life and his existence, his health, his well-being is being calculated by people he used to see every day, people that he would work with, people that, you know, could consider a friend maybe if you're on a good day. It's very interesting to see that and how maybe even that option is better for everyone. Like, you almost get the feeling that like Gideon is kind of thinking that about himself, like the way they laid up. It's like, what did he think on his hospital bed? And sure enough, those hallucinations start, and you really do get to see what I think he was thinking of or got sent to in his sedated dreamland.
And it's really cool because there is a element here of subverting what is known as the backstage musical in Hollywood. Is that since the 1930s with stuff like the Gold Diggers of 33 and advancing through the 50s and 60s with, you know, the original A Star Is Born, with Singin' in the Rain, with a chorus line, the backstage musical has always been a staple of Hollywood in that you would make the subject about people in town and make it about the process of getting a film or a production made or the rise of a star to give Hollywood that glitz and that glamour. It's one of the big reasons why Hollywood is this spectacle, is this idea rather than just a place. And in these hallucinations, you see these backstage numbers sung first by his ex-wife, then his girlfriend, then all of his trysts, and finally his daughter. You see Roy Scheider's character, Joe Gideon, literally in the hospital bed, but also directing the production and trying to get through to himself in the hospital bed. It's a beautiful blending of magical realism to juxtapose this truly horrifying event where he's bargaining to try and save his own life, and he's reflecting on what his real regrets are.
I really like those scenes. I really do. 'Cause like, there are so many different numbers in there that happen, right? Like, to paint the picture, right? This is where he's on the hospital bed, and it's like he's having like a break the fourth wall moment where he exists as a director but also in the bed, and like his people in his life are now, you know, coming to life in his head, trying to tell him to, like, I don't know, hang on. I feel that's the only thing they really try to do. And you wonder the whole time, like, are they accomplishing their goal? Like, is he understanding what they're saying? Like, I don't know. Like, to me, when I watch these things, I'm like, is Gideon getting tricked by the show business himself? Like, the performances and the acts, like, the message isn't getting through to him? Like, is it a showcase of the failure of what, performance art does, and how it doesn't, convey the message enough to get to Gideon, someone so hard-headed as him? I don't know, like, I feel like this whole sequence really is my favorite part of the movie.
I have to confess, BK, after we watched this, I went back and watched the last hour of this again because it's my favorite part of the movie too, is how this all winds down to its climax. I love this part of the film, and I wanted to make sure I got it right. Right at very least in my own idiom.
Okay.
Like my thought is that it really is bargaining for him in a couple of ways. The thing that I noticed in these scenes is that the first three numbers, his ex-wife's song, when she's talking about him missing her after he's gone, after you've gone.
Yeah, when you're gone, yes.
That doesn't really reach him. He doesn't really care that she's going to be in pain there. He doesn't care when his girlfriend sings Change Your Ways and is imploring him to stop the booze and the screwing around and the drugs. And he doesn't really seem to care when his old trysts are saying, we cried over you. We're glad you're sorry now that you're, paying for your consequences. He's even told by his directorial self out of the bed, you blew it. You were supposed to say, a line, I don't want to die, I want to keep living. He's not motivated by these mistakes that he's made personally. He doesn't seem to regret that a lot. What changes his mind is that fourth number, his daughter singing Some of These Days, where he realizes, oh my God, if I'm not here, I've really run the risk of the fact that I could have created another version of myself. He doesn't regret what he's done. He regrets what his actions might cause another person to do. And that's the only time he protests from the bed during these hallucinations.
It's very smart that you put that out, though, because you are right. At the end, like, Michelle's like on that. Is it a car? I forget what it was.
It's a hearse. It's a literal hearse.
It's a hearse? Okay. I was like, I'm not tripping. So it's like on it, and she's all glammed up, like very, sexualized, like in Broadway. Like, to me, when I saw that, I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, seeing Michelle in that, I don't know the word to say it. Like, what type of state she is in. Like, that's what I was trying to figure out what to say. Like, seeing Michelle portrayed that way as just someone who's very promiscuous, someone who is wrapped up in show business, someone who's literally holding a cigarette, is very interesting. That won't even motivate him enough to be there to change her, right? I feel that scene fueled him even more, being like, look what I could do to her if I was still around. Like, almost of a, like, maybe it is good if I am not there. Because that's what I saw it to me, is him more kind of like getting down on himself and throwing him into the depression stage.
I think there's a lot to that, but I think ultimately what's important here is that these realizations he's having about himself compel him for the first time in the film in his head to ask Death, will you please leave? Not now. Can you please just leave? Him doing literal physical bargaining with her, and she does relent for a moment. You're given that false hope that, okay, maybe he's going to accept, or maybe he's going to skip depression and acceptance. Maybe he's going to get out of this. As you see him recover, you even see the producers have dinner with the director that they've brought on to replace Gideon already, and saying, we're all relieved, he's going to survive. The show can get back on track. We're okay with this. But he almost immediately has another heart attack and a relapse, and Death shows right back up again. It's not even 4 or 5 minutes before she's back in his life again, and you realize he's gotten too close, and the only things left for him are depression and acceptance.
I feel like that is so perfectly put, Jack, because literally when he gets to this depressing stage, like, you're like, maybe this whole situation, like, was mental. And that's what it, like, for me, it felt that way, because he kind of goes a little deranged in his depression. Like, he undergoes a bit of psychosis, like actual physical psychosis, not metaphorical, as we've seen throughout the film. For the first time, like, again, his mental state is being reflected in the physical world, and like, he starts going crazy, like literally just being like, I'm fine, everybody's fine, like literally like lost in his mind, broken, like cracked, defeated, all of these emotions.
Well, not even just lost mentally, BK, is, he physically, tears out his IVs and like runs away from his hospital bed. And the magic realism that has been in his head the entire time starts making its way into the visual aesthetic and his reaction in his depression. While you hear the old comedy bit about anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance going through his head as he goes to the hospital, you see him doing things like going into the boiler room and dancing in the Singing in the Rain choreography in these puddles down there. You see him banging his head against a wall when he is talking through the sort of set pieces that he has constructed. When you see him go into the autopsy suite and talking to the brains and eyeballs about what they've done and saying that he'll be back, you see him go through this depression in a very kind of not silly way per se, but kind of a flippant way of looking at it. He's very distraught by it until this incredible moment in this small scene when he reaches this old woman's bed who is in just an excruciating amount of pain.
Yeah, like I was already in my feels at this point. Like now that you remind me of that, I'm like, I was already like emotionally attached to Gideon. Like from the bargaining stage here to the depression where I'm like, I'm on this ride with him. Like, I feel you, baby. Like, please, like you are almost pleading with the character and the movie to be like, let this be a goddamn happy ending. Like, goddamn, like, please let there be joy at the end of this tunnel. And like, it never happens, Jack. It doesn't happen.
BK, it is the 70s. There is no such thing as a happy ending in the 70s.
No, you get closure, but there is no bow. Sure, closure is fine, but I feel like I've just been emotionally whiplashed by the end of this. I'm like, okay, what do I watch now? What do I do? Go take a walk? Contemplate my life? What is death? Am I in denial? Like, come on, like.
Well, I will say, though, I love the fact that you use the word closure in the context of that point, because you get the last couple of beats in this film, you really do get closure on a couple of fronts. On one hand, when he visits this old woman and gets to the acceptance part of his death, he leans over and calls her beautiful and kisses her on the lips and gives this woman in excruciating pain a real moment of beauty. It's maybe the nicest thing Gideon's ever done in his entire life. You then see him with a hospital orderly singing old show tunes, and you realize that he's getting to the root in this scene. In his death, he's getting to the root of what it is he loved about music, just sharing a song with somebody and laughing about the details of it and just enjoying musical theater. You see him in these last gasps of his life getting to the real meat of who he is you see the kind person underneath Joe Gideon finally. As he has said earlier in the film, sometimes I don't know where the bullshit begins or ends. But here, the bullshit is gone. The entertainer is gone, and you just see a man connecting with what he loves and who he is. And that's got to be your closure.
I guess, okay? I'm not happy about it. I'm not. It's also like bittersweet, right? Like at that point, you're like, damn, like, wow, he is just a little innocent guy. Like, I can't believe I'm saying that about him, but like, you see innocence in him.
Yeah.
In that stage of like, he's just, I felt like he was a child. Like, oh my God, I'm getting a little emotional. Like, he's just a child. Like, I have seen myself in that spot before, guys. Like, so when you see him there and he's singing those show tunes, I'm like, damn, like, music is like one of the biggest things that helps me personally, and I know a lot of people through depression, like through stages of depression, right? So like to see him trying, like I feel in the first time of maybe just having that little semblance of escape or comfort before, like you say, he gets into acceptance, and like boy does he accept that shit, man. Like the song title, my guy, what? Like, this is the most morbid musical I've ever seen. Like, Bye Bye Life is your exit song? Oh my god.
Bye Bye Life is your exit song, but oh my god, BK, I said it to you when we watched the film. The last 30, 40 minutes of this film are what elevate it a lot for me personally. And I think that in reaching acceptance, in getting through his depression and realizing that he's going to die and accepting that, he really does bring the innocence question full circle, because in the beginning he is dismissing these actors in the Broadway scene in a very kind but yes, you're disposable kind of attitude. And he's realizing that he's just as disposable in the eyes of death, and he has to accept it. And it leads to, as much as I love Apocalypse Now, and I will stake a claim to that being my favorite film, this is probably my favorite ending to a film ever, is this musical number, Bye Bye Life. There is, well, first off, it hits Jesus Christ Superstars aesthetic completely.
It's like a 1-to-1, Jack. Like,
it's a beautiful visual reference, but it's also this very realistic, sardonic kind of number right from the beginning. There is this African-American host who has been on TV while he's been in the hospital, talking the usual entertainment bullshit about, this is one of my dearest friends, a great humanitarian for, has done all, hyping people up the way that we showbiz people do, because that's just our idiom of how we work. Well, he brings in this number by saying a ton of stuff about how Gideon is not a great person. But it leads into this huge number where Gideon is saying goodbye to everybody, and it's almost as though it really is his ideal version of how he wants to feel in being left behind. He wants people to be left with a big number and a big joy of music, because he did, underneath it all, want to put that joy into the world, and he wants the people to miss him when he's gone.
How do you sing those lyrics, Jack, in the most joyous way?
Well, I think it just fits into that acceptance question, is that he does know he has to leave life behind, but it's something that he's doing on his terms. He's not burning the candle at both ends. He's not trying to please anybody. He's not trying to be dishonest about how he feels or how his life has gone. He just is reflecting on it, and reflecting on the sort of beautiful gift that he is leaving behind and the new journey he is about to go on. And he makes it a big number because he wants to believe that he mattered. And there are tough moments in there. He hugs his crying daughter goodbye. He says to his ex-wife, "At least I won't have to lie to you anymore." He sees Katie in the audience with her new squeeze. He's not shying away from the practical realities of the point at which he's leaving these people behind, but he's getting to go out on his own terms in a deeply selfish and deeply hedonistic manner. This is how he wants to die. And in a way, it's kind of how we all want to die. We want to go out with that big anecdote, that big final number that makes people remember, wow, that's what I really liked about him, or that's what I really liked about her. We want to be remembered like that. But the truth of how he's actually treated as a body is brutal.
Oh, by all means. Like, it's very realistic is not necessarily the word I want to use, but
So to preface the way that this goes is that he's got this big musical number, bye bye life.
Oh yeah, there you go. Bye bye happiness. Hello.
This huge, but you're right. Yeah, this huge crescendo of music, and he heads down this conveyor belt as the song is building at the very end, heading towards the angel of death. It's finally time for him to pass on. It's been this huge number, and then it just cuts to his body in a body bag and just zips it up and immediately cues into the song Show Business by Ethel Merman. And you're just sitting there like, you're really going to do him like that? He goes out with this number and you're literally just putting him in a bag and ending the film? Are you kidding?
That's a wrap. Like, zip the body bag. We done. Like, I was so shook, Jack. I'm sitting there like, what? Like, I know he did his bows in that number, right? Going into the audience, like you said, shaking everybody's hands, giving some hugs, right? Like, I understand that was the end, but seeing the body bag, it was just like, right, this was a story, this was a life, and the end. Everybody's happy. Maybe not him.
And yeah, you're disposable.
Yep, you're disposable.
It to me is there's been a lot of very cutting stuff that we've discussed about the way that this film looks at show business, but that is really the capstone moment there after the climax, is just this idea that you literally are wrapping him up. You're putting it in the bag, it's done, and we're not going to dwell on it anymore. Show business moves on. This was his brief time here, and he's gone now. Goodbye. Showbiz lives forever. The villain kind of wins here.
Oh, I think so. I think the villain definitely wins here, Jack, right? Show business got their money, right? Because he did end up going before the time. Am I correct?
He did. And it's so funny is that the first shot you see him talking to Death, he is in clown makeup. Mm-hmm. And at the end here, he kind of is a fool. He believes this big thing about himself, that he will be loved and, missed when he's gone. And yet you just see the callous nature with which he's disposed. You do realize that it's a very heavy metaphor for how entertainment can treat a lot of people, but it also shows that he really was a fool throughout all of this. As the first opening sequence gives you that visual image of what he really ends up being. He is a fool to the entertainment industry, and that's the way it plays out. And sadly, BK, this film didn't just stop being accurate in the way it was constructed. Bob Fosse tragically predicted not only his own death, but his own cause of death, because he would have a relapse after his heart attack he had when he did Chicago about 9 years later, and he would pass away from that ailment in, I believe it was 86.
No way.
And he did. Yeah, it's one of the things about this film. It's a great film, but there is that morbidity to it, as he didn't just nail down the things about himself that he didn't like in his life, and he didn't just critique himself. He literally predicted his own death.
That I'm absolutely flabbergasted. Like, arguably might be the most genius work of art. Like, I don't even know how else to say that. Like, knowing that, like, how do you make a film showcasing all your flaws and what this industry is going to do to you, and like what it has done to you and what it will keep doing to you, and then continue to put yourself through that? You were true to the character you made in all that jazz. Like, having Mr. Bob Fosse be literally the same person as Joe Gideon is just crazy to me in this like cinematic experience. Like, I've never watched something that's, told as a movie, not as an actual like documentary, that really was just so honest and open and, I don't know, like, true. So that brings me to, coming towards our end here with like my final questions to you, Jack, is like, what about this film? You mentioned a lot of things that hit you, but what about it sticks with you the most?
That's a very good question. I think what it is for me that hits me about this film is not just that I feel like it is, though very heavy-handed at times, it is a very fair critique on show business, but it's also this really poignant image of what it means to be an artist. I think everybody who tries to create art, and even those people who don't think foolishly that they have the capacity to create art, and by the way, if you're listening and you're a person and you're breathing, you can create art. There's this level of self-effacement, a level of feeling unfulfilled by not quite getting your creative vision out in the way you want. There's always this struggle to be a perfectionist if you're a creative, that I think this film really nails very well. It nails those anxieties, it nails that pressure. And it also does a really, I think, honest job of accounting how we all kind of want to die. Now, in my early years, like literally when I was like 6 or 7, I had kind of an unhealthy fascination and fear of death, to the point where like my parents' coworkers would even like write me letters explaining sort of how they saw the process of death, trying to help out this little kid who was fixating on this stuff way before they should have been.
Aw.
And I know it's very, very sweet to think about.
Baby Jack. I can see
Right?
it now. Baby Jack contemplating the meaning of life and death at like 4. Like, what?
The pretentiousness started early, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh my God.
But I do think in a lot of ways that's how we all want to die. Like, we want to be held to account for our mistakes, but we also want people to recognize the way we see ourselves and our own self-image. We want that self-image we have of ourselves to be the thing that people remember. And I think the ways in which this strives to meld those ideas about creating and death and anxiety, it is something that just really hits me at the core of how I feel as a person. And I think it's an important lens through which you can understand artists. And that, to me, is the significance of this film.
I'm glad you said that, because I definitely feel similar. Like, it connected to me as an artist, as a creative, let alone my musical theater show business background. But
no kidding,
right? I mean, I'm watching it and I'm like, wow, like, I came to New York for that lifestyle. Like, that's what was so unsettling. Like, oh man, I'm so glad I didn't actually pursue that. Like, Jesus Christ.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh. But I feel like this film, really, the musical theater geek in me is geeking out, because like we got a lot of like Broadway stage play to film, like adaptations and things that kind of, I feel, pull from this movie and its excellence in conveying a more or less musical story, or musically, adjacent story, in a way that is appealing to someone who might not be into musicals at all.
I think that's a great point. When I described this film to you, I kind of called it the anti-musical musical because of its construction, because it is such a weirdly done film in the context of the musical genre. It's like you said up top, people expect it to be kind of flippant and always happy and always, everything comes up roses. And it just doesn't in all that jazz. It can't, by virtue of what it's supposed to mean. I just wish, BK, it was easier for people to find this film. One of the lasting legacies of films like All That Jazz, which came out in 1979 and did not have its first home release until it came out on DVD in 2003, a 24-year gap.
Oh, wow. Oh my God.
It's one of the tragedies of the home video boom, in a way, is that the home video boom was great in a lot of ways. It is great that people have that independent ownership of film, that they can exhibit films for people in that way. I think that's a great thing about film. It's that sense of gathering around the hearth in the modern context. It's our way of coming together in a lot of ways, is home video.
Totally.
But because it was so necessary for that market to be a hit, for the studios to make it viable, it meant that most of the stuff that was released on VHS in the 80s and even the early 90s was very driven on getting the biggest titles out there, the biggest budgets out there, making the most money possible. And with an auteur film, it's hard to make a lot of money. The French New Wave is incredibly influential. Didn't make a lot of money. The profits would be, if anything, from a gross, between 10 and 20 million if it was going to be a quote unquote big gross for that type of art house film. It's not a genre that's expected to do well financially, and it led to a lot of these titles being forgotten for a long time. Like, thank goodness we have the Criterion Collection that goes back and finds these old classics and does the groundwork of preserving them as much as possible. Because if we lost these films, it would be a true tragedy. All That Jazz is so visceral and so important as a metaphor, as a guide for future musicals, and yet nobody has seen it because it's so hard to get your hands on it. It's worth discussing in that context, because I think when you look at a film that is this good, it makes you ask the question, what other films have been forgotten by history? What is other stuff I can dig up in this vein that is important? And that is, to me, the biggest part about doing film criticism is I love talking about film, but I love it at its most when I'm bringing up new films and new spaces to people. And that's what All That Jazz opens up for me in a lot of ways.
I love that you said it that way, Job, because, like, I really feel people should watch this. Like, it's the same thing as how I kind of feel about Apocalypse Now, even though I didn't prefer that movie. It was just so strong in its cultural significance of everything. And the same thing with this. Like, this shows you show business. Like, this isn't a glamorized version of it, although there is lots of glam within the film. This is probably the most realistic approach to the life of theater that I've ever seen. So for me seeing this film, it's like, wow, I want people to see this because, like, they can get those stereotypes and those, like, false preconceptions about an industry and really get to see the life of somebody who's invested in it, which still holds up today. Like, that's the whole thing. The film holds up. This is not like a bad film.
Oh yeah, it holds up.
So, like, it holds up. It is something that is still very relevant to the state that we're in. And any creative who has ever dealt with, like, creative blocks or perfectionism, like those types of themes, like, I would implore you to watch this. Like, it might do something for you.
Please seek this film out. I beg of you.
Well, with that being said, I do need to know your rating, Jack, please, because I know Apocalypse Now was a 10 out of 10, but are we going to have that a 2 10 out of 10s already in the first season? I need to know.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
All That Jazz is, for all the reasons I've mentioned before, it's a deeply personal film to me. But I think it gets that 10. It goes from that 8, from about like an 8, I'd say, to a 10 in the last 40 minutes because it does not compromise with its message. It does not compromise with its vision. It is put together to be exactly as Bob Fosse said he wanted to be. He wanted to talk very earnestly about death and about himself in that style of the auteurs. And the only way he could do that was through the lens of musical theater because it's what he knows. And all of Bob Fosse's being, all of his knowledge is on the screen in this film. I can't give it anything but a 10 out of 10 because of how earnest it is. Even if Fosse's very tough on himself compared to the sort of genteel man that a lot of people knew him to be, he lets you see that seedy side of himself, and he doesn't shy away from it because he knows it's going to be important for the film. And so it can't be anything but a 10 for me. But BK, I got to know what yours is going to be because we have had, I believe, 110 from you, correct?
Yes, 110 from me. And you're going to be surprised. This is very, very surprising, but I am, in fact, going to give this a 10 out of 10 as well.
I love it. Oh my goodness. It's our first 2 agreements in 2 weeks and 2 high-level agreements.
I definitely would watch again. It's one of those films I would watch like once a year, like on like traditionally. Like it's moving. There's so many layers to it. And then learning the story about it just gave me such a profound appreciation for it to know like the behind the scenes, like it just makes it a work of art. Like it's brilliant. Like I can't deny it's very construction of brilliance, you know. To give it anything less than that would be an insult to how much was put into this. So, and that's me coming from someone who's like, I don't know, I might have seen like half of it when I was 6 and didn't really like it, to being grown watching it in its entirety and honestly truly loving it. I have a fondness for this film. So 10 out of 10 for BK as well.
You have no idea how happy I am right now.
Aww.
Like I say off top that I love 1979 this much, and your 2 10s have both come from that year with Alien and All That Jazz. It's just I'm loving it. It's building up my argument that I will have to make in a longer form at some point. That is the best year of American cinema that we've ever had, even if it wasn't the most financially successful year. That creative juice of New Hollywood, that last gasp gave us so much. And this great metaphor for death and for sin and for all that. It's universal, and it's going to prove to be a series of themes that we're going to revisit pretty quickly with our next podcast. Now, folks, we are going to take a week break. We've got some stuff that we need to handle internally. We're people with our own lives, but we're getting back into it in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, with another film that is going to be discussing death and sin.
Oh, yes. Our next episode, as soon as we can get around to it, is going to be David Fincher's Seven. I am so excited to see this.
I am too. It's obviously, for those who have seen Seven, a very different approach than all that jazz. I'm excited for this because everybody's got love for Fight Club. Some people have love for Social Network. I don't. This is my favorite David Fincher film. I think it is just such an interesting thriller and really an interesting horror film on top of being a thriller, even though the thriller aspects are more important to it. But it's a beautifully shot, beautifully executed film that I think, BK, is going to make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, because you've never seen this, right?
No, I have not seen this. I love thrillers. I've been wanting to watch this, so I have a great excuse now. Low-key did that on purpose, guys. So I'm so hyped. Like thrillers, psychological dramas, any of those are like my top movies next to sci-fi. So I'm super hyped to see what this is for me. I don't want to even look up anything else because I'm like, I just want to go in, experience, and then research. So y'all better buckle up because this next episode is going to be dope.
And I'm not going to tell you anything. I will tell you nothing about this thing. Nothing about this film. Absolutely not, because part of the experience of Seven is watching it cold. If you have avoided spoilers for this film, if you are lucky enough to be somebody who doesn't know what happens in this film, my God, go watch it before you find out, because its execution in watching it the first time is a really special experience. I still remember my first experience going through this in my sophomore year of high school. It was such an influential experience that I literally went out and bought this script. Somewhere in my family home back in North Carolina, there is a hard copy of the script of Seven that I have read several times. That's how much I enjoy it.
Oh, I am geeked now. Okay, stop. Don't tell me.
I'm stopping. It's just you keep making it easy for me. You're like, hey, let's watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. Let's watch Seven. And I'm like, these are some of my most favorite films. Okay, I'm glad to put that in the season. You keep letting me get away with it, BK. We've got to watch something at a certain point that I'm not gonna like.
Oh, look, we've got some stacked stuff for the latter half of season 1, so you are going to be shook. I don't want to reveal anything yet because they're so juicy. I can't even. But Jack, I can't wait for you to get to my picks.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun in that second half of the season, and we will have some more news about that in the coming weeks. But I'm so excited for Seven next week. But we got to make sure we wrap this up now, because we have given these people that deep dive on all that jazz, and we love giving these deep dives on Revenge of the Film Nerds. It's going to keep happening, folks. We're on any podcast network you can possibly think of, including the big three: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. We're now live there as well. And we do have our Twitter account going, RFN_podcast. And we're building up an empire, as it were. We're getting bigger and better with this. We're going to the show. We're trying to be in show business with this bad boy. And so we're going to keep bringing it to you. And BK, where are you bringing your content to them?
Yes. You can find me on the interwebs and all the many places at Black Crystals. 2 Ks, a Y, and an EL. Trust me. Check me out on Twitch and Twitter and Instagram. And Jack, let them know where we can find you now that wrestling is going to be starting back up.
Oh my goodness. We got some great news this week. Gleason's Gym in Brooklyn, New York has officially passed New York inspection. They are going to be allowed to operate at 33% capacity and are doing so safely. I'm very, very pleased that my home away from home is back up and running, and WUW Wrestling is going to be creating that content on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch. We are at WUW Wrestling on all of those platforms. And for me personally, you're going to find me on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook at Manly Jack Manly. That's MANLY on the first one, MANLEY on the second one, because yes, that is my real last name.
And we love to see it. And thank you so much for listening with us and joining us today. I had a blast, honestly, diving into one of my top movies now. It's weird that I'm saying that, but All That Jazz is in fact one of those movies you've got to see at least once.
I'm so happy right now. You have no idea. All right. We got to get out of here. We're on this high for me. We got to get out of here. Thank you so much, guys. I am Jack Manly.
And I'm Black Crystal, and we will see you next time on Revenge of the Film Nerds.
Take care, everybody. Peace and chicken grease.
Janet.